Today's video will be a little different. I'll tell you about how I painted my latest artwork, share what inspired it, and reflect on the importance of creativity in today's world. I used this photo that I took a few years ago as a reference. First, I put together a collage from it in the Procreate app on my iPad. I played around with the colors a bit, and then I created another layer where I traced the outlines. Finally, I locked the screen on my iPad by going to Settings, Accessibility, Guided Access, and turning on Guided Access. Then I just had to quickly press the top button 3 times and the screen locked. I traced the sketch with a pencil onto tracing paper and scribbled on the other side with a watercolor pencil. I placed the tracing paper with the scribbled side down on watercolor paper, secured it with washi tape so it wouldn't move, and went over all of the outlines again. This way, the watercolor pencil transfers onto the paper. By sketching on my iPad first, I can change or resize the sketch as I please. If I drew it directly on watercolor paper, there's a risk that I'd either place it incorrectly or it would end up a different size than I wanted, and as a result I'd have to erase and redo it. Not only could this leave smudges on the paper, but I'd also have to do the sketch in pencil. And once I paint over the pencil with watercolors, it is not possible to erase it. Which doesn't bother me if it's just painting in a sketchbook, but for these larger paintings, I want them to be as clean as possible. That's exactly why I use watercolor pencils, which dissolve while painting and won't show through the finished piece. When I took the tracing paper off, I realized the sketch wasn't dark enough, so I had to go over it again with watercolor pencils. Now, I'd like to tell you a bit about the inspiration for this painting. Lately, I have really been into the Dreamcore aesthetic. It features surreal settings, dreamlike elements, and often bold neon colors. To give my painting a dreamy feel, I used these neon watercolors. First, I went over the light areas on the skulls with pink. I used blue for the shadows because it's a cool color, and cool colors visually seem to go to the back. I had to redo part of the skull because I'm covering it with my hand in the photo, so I used images from the internet as a reference. This skull has a rather interesting story behind it, one that began in Iceland. For context, there are a lot of sheep in Iceland and they have complete freedom of movement during the summer. This sheep skull, broken off and partially overgrown with algae, was found on a beach by a well-known Icelandic writer and journalist whose name translates to Raven, Son of the Glacier. I love Icelandic names. The organization I volunteered for does beach cleanups. The same ocean currents that once washed much-needed wood ashore in Iceland now bring tons of marine debris to some beaches. Plastic, fishing nets, shoes, broken buoys, and all sorts of other things. Once I even found an empty watercolor pan. Cleaning up trash from the beach means it doesn't get back into the ocean where it could cause further issues. Animals are already getting tangled in broken fishing nets, birds' stomachs are full of plastic, and that's not even mentioning microplastics. Raven led many of the beach cleanups. During one of them, he found a sheep skull on the beach and named it Ingrid. At one point, he gave it to me to keep safe, so I was moving around everywhere with the sheep's skull. One day, my friend and I were riding in a car when Ingrid fell under the brake pedal. I have to say, our future looked pretty bleak for a moment there, because, believe it or not, you can't brake with a skull under the pedal. Luckily, my friend managed to push Ingrid out from under the brake, so we survived unscathed. My friend, Raven, and I were working together to prepare an exhibition where we planned to show the people of Iceland all the treasures we'd found on the beaches and secure support for future cleanups. Besides Ingrid, Raven also had a real stuffed raven, which he named Cecilia. Sadly, Raven got taken too soon from this world because of cancer, and I returned the skull to him a long time ago, so all that I have left are these strange memories. Well, back to the painting. To achieve a dreamlike effect, I played around with chromatic aberration in Procreate. In photography, chromatic aberration is a problem caused by each color having a slightly different angle of refraction as it passes through the lens. This results in colored fringes appearing along the edges of objects. That's why I painted the inner parts of the flowers neon green. Then I started painting the mirror. For the first time, I tried Aquafix by Schminke. Following the instructions, I used it instead of water and mixed it with watercolor paint. Aquafix makes the paint water resistant, so you can add more layers without lifting the colors. Which is true, but it seemed to me that it transformed the watercolor into something else. First of all, I'm used to the fact that a layer of watercolor, unlike, for example, thicker acrylic, stays flat. But the watercolor with Aquafix was a bit 3D. Plus, the paint had a slight sheen which isn't very visible in the video. And while the subsequent layers of watercolor didn't activate it, they didn't adhere to it at all. It was as if it repelled water. In the end, it didn't bother me much, I only used it for the red details on the mirror, but I'm not sure if I'll use Aquafix again in the future because I like working with layers of color. Maybe I'll have to experiment with it more. You see, the entire painting process sped up, but believe me, it took many hours, and with breaks, I worked on it for about a month. Sometimes it seems to me that in today's world, there's too much focus on results and people prioritize ways to reach their goals as quickly as possible, no matter the cost. I'm not immune to that either. I love the process of watercolor painting, and yet sometimes while painting, I catch myself impatiently wondering why it's taking me so long. Shouldn't I have this finished in a week, a day, an afternoon? I have to stop and ask myself why I am being so impatient. It will take as much time as it will take. But of course, this approach is not liked by the algorithms. They force you to churn out content and feed the machine like crazy, or else you risk the punishment of no one ever seeing your work. An environment like this doesn't do much to foster creativity, but what thrives in it is AI slop. To be honest, I don't really want to talk about generative AI or even think about it, but I'd like to say this. Some people are completely blinded by the desire for quick results without any work. They don't understand why they should learn to paint, draw, edit videos or animate when all they have to do is type a few words into a computer and it spits out whatever they want. It's an unoriginal, regurgitated mix of human creativity in a shiny new coat. And while the user gushes over the empty, shiny thing, the leaders of big companies, who couldn't care less if this planet burns to the ground in a few decades, since they'll probably just fly away in their rocket anyway, are rubbing their hands together while looking at the zeros in their bank accounts. Sure, generative AI might entertain or delight you for a moment. The computer spits out an essay for you and then you have the chance to spend more time doing what? Scrolling on your phone? You should realize that by doing this, you're literally handing over your creative power to someone else. If you don't train your brain, it will simply atrophy. If you don't use your creative muscles, you might lose more than you realize. I got a little carried away there. Maybe I should tell you what this mysterious blue liquid is that I started covering my painting with. Once dry, the masking fluid forms a waterproof film that protects the areas I've already painted, so I can paint over them without worry. It must be applied only to completely dry paper, and it's also a good idea to test it first on a piece of the same paper you plan to use for the painting. Some types of paper can't handle it. The liquid sticks too much, and when you remove it, you'll tear the paper with it. Never apply masking fluid directly with a brush, because it will coat the bristles and ruin it. The only way to prevent this is to dip the brush in soapy water often, but that seems like too much work to me. So I use this masking fluid with an applicator. I also covered part of the skull with washi tape. I wanted to paint a sky with sunset and pink clouds inside the mirror because clouds are a common motif in Dreamcore aesthetics. I chose the wet-on-wet method. For this method, it's best to mix all your paints in advance because you will need to work as quickly as possible so the paper doesn't have time to dry. So that's what I did, and then I dampened the inside of the mirror with a clean, wet brush. Next, I added blue and purple to paint the sky, leaving white spaces for the clouds. I rinsed my brush and added pink and dark purple to the white spaces to create the clouds. Once the paint has dried, the colors didn't seem vivid enough to me, so I dampened the painting again and added another layer of paint. Just to be safe, I finally dried everything with a hairdryer. With this method, you don't have as much control over the result, but luckily, everything turned out well. Then I started peeling the masking fluid off the branches and skulls bit by bit. I use an eraser to remove the masking fluid simply because I don't like touching the paper and I think the painting doesn't benefit from too much touching anyway. But there was so much of it that I always had to take a small piece and tear it off, then erase another piece, tear it off, and so on and so forth. Then I had to mask the mirror frame so I could finish the background. I covered the inside of the mirror with tracing paper, which I taped down on the sides with washi tape, so there was no chance of accidentally splashing paint on the finished part. I wanted to create a contrast between the sunset sky and the black space with rainbow stars. That's why I started with the rainbow layer. First I mixed all the colors, then I dampened the paper with a clean, wet brush. Then I simply applied the colors one by one to the background. Of course, I rinsed the brush between each color so they wouldn't mix together. As you can see, my cat Shelly came over to help me out. Once the paint dried, it didn't look saturated enough to me, so I dampened the paper again and added another layer. Watercolors always look lighter when dry than when wet, so it's sometimes hard to tell if they're saturated enough. I also added some dots with a brush, even though they won't be visible in the final result. At this stage it looked very colorful, but don't worry, the next layer will improve it significantly. After it dried, I started adding drops of masking fluid to the paper. Using a needle, I pulled the liquid outward from the center in a star shape. I wasn't sure how it would turn out, but I think it worked out pretty well in the end. I used this method to arrange stars across the entire background. I varied their size and the number of rays. Once the masking fluid dried, I added black paint. I needed a lot of black, so at first I used the only black watercolor in a tube that I have, which was Winsor & Newton Cotman. But it didn't turn out well. I didn't film this part, but trust me, the paint had a strange sheen in some places after it dried. Maybe it's because it's a student-grade paint, so it has a bit more binder than pigment. So I washed it off with clean water and instead used high-quality black paint from Schminke. On one side of the mirror I added some pink, and in some spots I lifted some paint away to create the impression of a nebula in space. Finally, I added about 3 layers of black paint and used up almost all that I have. But it was worth it, trust me. You'll see the result at the end of this video. Once everything was completely dry, I could finally get to work removing all the masking liquid. I always erased a small section and then removed the liquid bit by bit. I always enjoy this step because I finally get to see how all the elements of the painting work together. And it's also satisfying. After removing the liquid from the mirror, you can see how 3D the areas that I painted with Aquafix were. You might also notice that I lifted a little bit of paint along with the masking fluid, but it was nothing I couldn't fix if needed. The whole removal process took quite a while, and in the end I ended up with a pretty sizable pile at the edge of the board. The masking liquid creates rather irregular edges. I needed to fix that, so I took a thin brush and carefully traced all the edges of the mirror with black paint. This is a special liner brush that creates beautifully smooth lines thanks to its long bristles. I adjusted the shape of the stars using a small, thin brush and black paint. Sometimes I had to remove the black paint with a clean, damp brush so I could give the star the perfect shape. I recall the words of Alan Watts. The meaning and purpose of dancing is the dance. Like music also, it is fulfilled in each moment of its course. You do not play a sonata in order to reach the final chord, and if the meaning of things were simply in ends, composers would write nothing but finales. Each and every one of us can decide when to use and when not to use AI, when it can help us and when it actually hurts us. Creating art can be slow, boring, or even annoying, and most likely not totally perfect. But that's precisely where the beauty and humanity of art lies, isn't it? Remember when I told you about chromatic aberration? This is another part of it. I always diffuse the color outward with a clean, damp brush. I decided to do the same with the inner edge of the mirror. To make it look as clean as possible, I first traced a pink watercolor pencil along the curve ruler. I blended the pencil with water, added neon pink, and diffused it with a clean, damp brush. I repeated the same process with the edges of the skulls. Finally, I wanted to achieve the same effect with the flowers against the black background. So I had to lift the black paint around the flowers several times with a clean, damp brush and blot it with a tissue. Then I could add neon pink to the edges. After that, I just had to touch up a few details and it was done. Unfortunately, while removing the tape, I realized that a piece of paper had stuck to the board, so I had to cut it off with the scalpel. There was probably still glue on the board from a previous painting. I didn't think to film it until I was peeling off the tape, which is why the board is so wet. Luckily, the front of the painting wasn't damaged. You can only see it from the back. And here is the finished painting. I have to say I'm happy with it and I managed to achieve the effect I wanted. How do you like it? Let me know in the comments. And follow me for more videos like this.